Does the reality or lack thereof of so-called life after death have any practical consequences, or is it a purely theoretical concern? Be there evidence or reasoning for or against it? Meaning, some would have it that the possibility of the persistence of my personality, or at least of my individuality in some sense of the term, is of paramount importance. It determines how I live my life today. Others would have it that it is of no importance. It's none of my concern. Whatever happens after death, and I just need to focus on the present and on what I am doing now. So, what reasoning can we refer to? Would we illuminate these issues at least a little bit per obviously or indefinitely limited capacities? What would seem to be in order would be the clarification of some of the terms in question and what they purportedly refer to. Life, death, individuality, personality. What exactly do we mean by these terms? So, first of all, we can try to describe what is probably commonly colloquially meant in connection with such a phrase as, say, life after death. Right? For example, I think myself, and I visualize something, just what I feel that I am, or maybe I visualize my body or my face or my name, my self-concept, my self-image, and then I might imagine that after my body dies, perhaps some kind of vapor will float away, right, such as was me. Maybe I will find myself, just somewhere else, up there physically or in some kind of other quote unquote dimension, whatever the case might be. What, however, could be a more sophisticated way to look at the matter without getting too kind of technical from a philosophical point of view. It could be suggested that the general worldview that would make any possibility of the persistence of personality an option that can even be theoretically explored would be a position such as has been called in philosophy idealism. What that term means also has varied throughout the history of philosophy, but if we could kind of convey some sort of gist in connection with it, it could be that, first of all, values such as humans recognize as the highest, be it truth, goodness, beauty, that these values are organic to existence, that they have a true and permanent foothold in the ultimate scheme of things. That the extent, meaning the universe said broadly, is intrinsically, fundamentally rational and reasonable, and also that perhaps self-existence is drawn from the data of self-consciousness, as opposed to that which really exists being some or another term such as matter or atoms or what have we. A view that has been commonly associated with being the contrary of idealism, defined in certain ways, would be realism. By realism, most people probably would mean I visualize stuff and I think that stuff simply exists. Or I think of terms like atoms or electrons or whatever the latest terminology is, the Higgs boson, the quantum, the schmantum, this and that. And then I kind of imagine it there, and I don't note the fact that I'm imagining it, and I think that is what really exists. The real reality is whatever physicists say is the underlying substratum of everything, and anything else, such as could be called self-consciousness, mind, intelligence, that would be an epiphenomenon of that underlying reality, meaning it would be resultant of it, incidentally, presumably. The base reality is, again, my visualization of stuff, matter, this, that, and the other, and then so-called consciousness or what have we might arise as a result of it. So in response to this view, something like idealism or along the lines of idealism would point out that self-existence is something that is strictly and solely drawn from self-consciousness. Meaning, put simply, the proof that I exist is simply and solely that I exist. I can't prove that I exist from the point of view of subconsciousness in any kind of way, be it by a microscope, by a telescope, by a chemical test, simply by noting the fact, self-awareness or something like that. Now, that self-existence can then be verbally and conceptually attached either to our notion of tangible impenetrability, that one thing doesn't go through another thing, right? Like two stones. Through our notion of visual extension, that something is extended visually in space, a hand, a stone, the ceiling, this and that, or to various terms of different kinds of philosophies that attempt to account for the appearances. For example, again, atoms or electrons, Higgs boson particles, this, that, or the other. Basically, I'm taking what rightly belongs only to self-consciousness, and I am strictly verbally and conceptually attempting to attach it to different kinds of aspects of experience, or even worse, abstractions from experience. For example, by the term matter, could be, of course, meant anything that is tangibly impenetrable, could be meant anything that is visually extended, in which case it would have to apply to holograms and so forth, so that probably wouldn't be an definition. But aside from trying to cite some such experience, it's an abstraction. We suppose that there's something self-same concerning a stone and concerning a phone and a table and a tennis racket and so forth. And we use a term to refer to that purported universal or abstraction, i.e. matter. Matter in this sense has never been seen or touched or smelt or tasted or anything like that, right? It's just a convenient word that we can use. So it would seem to be then illogical and illicit to ever attempt to attribute self-existence, again, such as is drawn from self-consciousness, to anything but self-consciousness, to experiences such as are predicated on consciousness. Again, as a simple shortcut, I have a dream, and I can dream of visual extension and tangible impenetrability and all kinds of things, everything that I can experience in waking life, and I can dream of looking at things under a microscope. Excuse me. It would never, from that, follow that what truly exists in the domain of the dream is self-existent so-called matter, or whatever matter is made of, and that I, as the sentience, having the dream is an epiphenomenon of the matter. That's, hopefully it's clear, that is absolutely absurd. Life, of course, is not a dream, otherwise the term dream would have no sense. Life is life, dreaming is an experience that we have in this wider context of life. But concerning our knowledge, concerning what we can know about reality, we cannot, we don't have something in waking life such as is qualitatively different than that which we have in dreaming life, such as would allow us to say that in waking life, really the underlying reality is the stuff, and sentience is an epiphenomenon of the stuff. But anyhow, that's just to establish a general kind of foundation here off of which we could go forth. If we do grant that, first of all, there is the possibility that values such as human beings recognize as the highest, such as truth and goodness and intrinsic rationality, if we do grant that there's the possibility that those values are, again, organic and intrinsic to the ultimate scheme of things, and that possibility can exist under the broad umbrella of so-called idealism, just to use the philosophical term, it cannot exist under the so-called, under the term of so-called materialism, right, or kind of untutored naturalism, again, these kinds of imaginary conceptions that there's this stuff and then the sentience emerges from the stuff when the molecules collide in a certain kind of way, then this, that, and the other. whatever the case might be, not to favor one or the other, just to present them. So if we do grant that perhaps values do have an organic and intrinsic home in the scheme of things, then we could first of all ask ourselves certain questions. For example, what is the highest possible product in the scheme of things? Right? Is it a thing? Is a mountain that's big enough the highest possible product? Is it something that is just like, exciting, like a tsunami, if that's exciting, or a weather event? Is it something that's bright enough, like the sun? Is it something that to us maybe elicits the most amount of awe, like the starry night sky, or something like this, or a nice landscape? No, all of that cannot even be spoken of outside of the experiences that we can have. Right, so an alternative answer would then be that the highest possible product concerning all of that which exists and comes about is what we could call human personality. Right? We say that something such as is called sentience, or some kind of awareness and arguably intelligence, it can be inferred in connection with any life that responds to stimuli, that appears to respond spontaneously, to make decisions of a kind, to have preferences. Right? A mosquito has preferences because when we put on bug spray, if the bug spray works, the mosquitoes should flee. So even something as comparatively simple as that warrants an inference of intelligence and of sentience. Right? However, human personality is not something that can be inferred in connection with animals or in connection with insects, or for that matter, in connection with us human beings prior to a certain point of development. Meaning I do not have human personality proper as an infant. I have hopefully the potential for it, but it's not yet realized. I do not even have it as an immature teen, unfortunately. And in fact, I don't even have it as an immature adult. Human personality proper, self-conscious individuality, such as is personal, such as is integrated, we might say, is something that comes about in the course of what is called time, in the course of a process of succession. And we can argue that that is the only reasonable candidate for the highest possible product of all that there is. Aside from any kind of logical or technical arguments, we can use some common sense. Right? Animals are phenomenal. Cows are great. Right? For some people, for the purpose of eating, for others, for the purpose of pets or companionship. And yet a cow is a cow, and it can graze, and it can moo, and it can give us milk and give its babies milk. Okay, it is what it is, right? An ant is also nice. Put a bunch of ants together. It's amazing what they can do, what kind of structures they can build. But an ant is an ant, right? A human being, however, such as has truly matured and attained to genuine individuality, the fact that that stands higher in any possible, or according to any possible hierarchy of values, hopefully is clear enough. And if it's not, well then perhaps we cannot proceed. If somebody would hold that an ant is akin to a human being, or what a human being can become, the experience of what it possibly is like to be an ant is anything like the experience of what it is like to be a properly developed human being, well then, okay, good for you. There's not much else to say. But if not, we can go ahead then under the speculative suggestion that true human personality is the highest product concerning that which there is. Now the question is then, okay, great, is there any possibility of the persistence of human personality proper? That would seem to be predicated on the question of whether or not it is an epiphenomenon of the anatomy, or whether it is something that relies strictly and solely on it, such as cannot possibly be severed from it without itself dissipating. It would also face the objection that anything that comes together must need come apart. That which was not shall not be. Some people are asked, what will happen after death? Well, where was I before I was born? It's going to be the same thing after. So to the latter objection, it could be offered that the world process seems to be creative. There is the possibility of generating that which was not there prior. Something as simple as building a sandcastle, or painting a painting, or sculpting a statue. But further, a very important point to mind would be that destruction is not part and parcel of the idea of any given particular thing in and of its own self. Meaning we say, yeah, sure, you can create a sandcastle, but soon the wave is going to wash it away. You can create a statue, but the statue will eventually be worn down by the weather and such. You can create a painting, but it's not going to last forever, even if it's very well preserved in a nice gallery. Okay, 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000, not forever. So here, the detail would be that destruction appears to come about because there are clashing influences. Right? A statue is eventually worn down because a statue is a form imposed on, for example, granite or marble or some other kind of stone. And that stone continues to be influenced in the capacity of its stoneness by, for example, the rain and the snow and wind and temperature and such. And therefore the form, that was on it imposed eventually shall fall away. But it's not because destruction is an intrinsic part of what it means to be a statue. Right? Just like if I scribble 2 + 2 = 4 in the sand, it will soon be washed away. Is it because destruction is an intrinsic and essential part of what it means to be 2 + 2 = 4? No, it's because 2 + 2 = 4 is a form that is imposed on sand, and sand shall be influenced as sand by all the applicable elements, such as the waves, right, which will wash it away. So there is no guarantee. Not only is there no guarantee, there's no necessity that which comes about in the course of the creative world process shall be destroyed just because it came together. There does seem to be the possibility that something can arise and yet persist, long as there are no other influences that wash that form away. Theoretically speaking, let's say there was some time before a statue, say David, by Michelangelo was made, and then that statue is made. Now, if there were no influences whatsoever, such as would remove that form, weather and whatever else, even if it's very well preserved, then the statue would just be. Right? There was a time when it wasn't, we would say, but it was made and then it will just be. Now, scientists would say, okay, it will be until the cosmos collapses, this, that, and the other, whatever the case might be concerning those speculations. That would still be an example of influences exterior to the statue wearing away the statue. If there were no such influences, in theory, the statue would simply persist, even though at one point it did not exist. So this logically seems to give rise to the possibility that human personality, even though it comes about in the course of time, can persist, long as there are no influences such as would wear it away. And insofar as it is not intrinsically and necessarily predicated on the anatomy, it may be that there are no such influences, because clearly there are as it concerns the anatomy. Now, the second thing to mind would be to ask, okay, what is needed for me to develop a personality such as is not simply and solely rooted in my anatomy and in the kind of psychology that seems to arise in connection with it? And that would seem to be a question of proper human development. I start out as a sort of psychophysical seed. I have my body and my appetites and my impulses and my ability to desire, and to remember and to will and to think and so forth. If, however, I properly develop and I develop an individuality, what can be called, say, an intellectual, a moral, a human individuality, a personal inner reality, such as goes beyond the anatomy, goes beyond myself qua animal, in the capacity of animal, then, at least as it concerns direct experience, I will have an individuality such as is not consigned to animality, such as is not consigned to the psychophysical seed that individuality certainly did begin as. Excuse me. So, to summarize and to try to wrap up and give us some practical conclusions, if there is the possibility of developing, of bringing about, of fleshing out, however we would phrase it, an individuality such as was not and will never be replicated, is mine, is personal, is individual, such as is not narrowed down to the initial psychological, physical, psychophysical, what have we, little bit of animalism and selfishness and self-centeredness that we start out with, then that possibility presumably ought to be a priority, right? And it will influence how I live my life most certainly, each and every day. If my goal is to become everything that I can be, because I believe that I can one day, so to say, stand in the orchard of eternity as a tall and mighty oak that will never be chopped down, that will never rot away, well, then that's what I would direct my focus at. I would try to live that life, a human life. I would try to get myself off my hands. I would try to overcome my self-centeredness. I would try to face my inner evil, and hopefully through cooperating with truth and goodness and properly using my freedom, moving in the direction of becoming everything that I can be. If there is no such possibility, and admittedly that possibility seems to be predicated on a number of conceptions and suggestions as to the way that reality is, there is no such possibility, then I am and can never be anything more than merely an animal, a grasping creature, really beneath animals, because animals are innocent. They cannot be evil. They cannot be self-centered in the way that we can be. So really, I can't be anything. I can't even be an animal. I have to be beneath an animal. I can never develop any kind of lasting, excuse me, character, such as stands above the tempest of time and the constantly shifting moment. And then my best bet could be something like trying to maybe just stimulate myself kind of physically as much as I can, drugs, alcohol, and so forth. And that's about it, right? And wait till my body dies, and then so shall I. So it certainly then would have practical consequences. There would be no point in working hard towards attaining to a true edifying education, such as permits the formation of human individuality, if there is no possibility of that individuality persisting. Bodies come and go all the time. At any moment, my body can go. I can be perfectly healthy, one little aneurysm, one little accident may be spared, and that's it. The amount of effort that is needed to become a human being, to form oneself into something that, excuse me, can conceivably rise above the animal level, rise above the temporal, that effort would never be warranted if there is absolutely no possibility of it being rewarded. The good news then would be that there at least is that possibility, and at most a very strong case can be built in its favor. And it would therefore behoove us to consider that case and its possible practical consequences. Thank you for listening.